Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to go ahead and open up the first scene in this project directory where we're going to go ahead and get our first taste of rendering in 3ds Max and start looking at some of the most important tools for rendering so we can get on our way. So the first thing we'll want to do is open up one of the scenes that comes with this project directory that came with this tutorial. So let's go over here to File and we'll go to Open. And the shortcut for that is Control O. Now, because we loaded up this project directory, Max is going to know exactly where to go to open up our scenes. So you should get a list of scenes here. Now the scene that we want to open is the scene called primitives.max. So go ahead and select it and click on open. And that'll open up this very basic simple scene that we're going to use here as a sort of test bed to work with rendering tools inside of 3ds Max. So let's go ahead and get this started. So it's a very simple scene. We have a ground plane here acting almost like a floor or surface of a table if you want. We also have a few different primitives such as a box, cylinder, a pyramid, a cone, and a few little good old-fashioned teapots here. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we do that, what is the process of rendering? Very simple and very quickly put, the process of rendering is taking all the information from your lighting, colors and materials, and your shapes and your objects in your scene and outputting it to a final image. The final image can be a rendered still or it can be a sequence of images to make a movie. So let's go ahead and look at how you can render in 3ds Max and what are the different tools associated with rendering. To render, we can come up here to Render Main menu and we'll see here under Render, Shift Q is the shortcut. If we click on this, we'll go ahead and perform a render. And what you see in front of you is the rendered frame window in 3ds Max. The rendered frame window shows us the actual render here in front of us and also provides many tools and features up here in this toolbar area so we can go ahead and edit this render and do all kinds of different things with it. So let's go ahead and start with the upper left portion of the rendered frame window over here. Now this is the area to render options. We have several different options here. By default we're set to view mode. View mode allows us to render pretty much everything that's in our current view. And because our current view is the perspective viewport over here, that's where we're going to render out. We're going to render this out from the viewpoint of the perspective view window. Okay? So we can switch to different modes. If we click on this arrow here, we open up a drop box with different options. We get 5 options in total. Not just view, but we also get selected, region, crop, and blow up. So let's look at all of these one by one to see how they work. Let's click on selected here. Selected allows us to render only the object that we have selected in our viewport. So let's see how that works. What I'm going to do is move this window up here to the upper left just so it's a little bit out of the way. And let's go ahead and select an object. Let's select the pyramid here in the front. Now, after I select the pyramid, if I hit render, you notice that there's this sort of black pixel area around the pyramid. That's showing me that it's trying to render only the pyramid. The reason that this other stuff is here is because I had rendered it out before. So to clear it out, I'll click on this black X icon right up here. Once I do that, the entire render gets cleared out. Now I have the pyramid selected in the viewport. So now, let me go ahead and click on render. And you notice that the renderer only renders out what I have selected, in this case, the pyramid. So you can go ahead and selectively render out what you want. Now let me click here in this drop down box and switch to region. Region is a pretty neat mode. Region gives us this tool here that you can see in the rendered view in the rendered frame window, and it also gives us the same tool here in our perspective view window. What this large box here allows us to do is to choose the region of the area here that we want to render. And you can do that by using the selection handles that are located all around this box. You notice there's these square little selection handles, and if you put your mouse over it, you notice your mouse cursor changes to different arrow icons. So I can grab this top corner here and scale it down so that I can render only this pyramid here, or anything that falls basically into this render region square. I can also click on this X button here to close it, but I'm not going to close it right now. With this region selected, I'll go ahead and click on render, and you notice that everything gets rendered that falls inside of that box, which is pretty neat. You can adjust that render region selection from inside the rendered frame window, or you can adjust it using the selection handles inside of the perspective view window. So it's actually very neat and very interactive tool. Over here we'll have these two icons. One has a little hand and one doesn't. The one on the left with the little hand, when you switch to region mode, automatically becomes selected. If we click on it to deactivate it, you'll notice that the render region remains, but we can no longer edit it. So let's click on that again to bring it back out. And you can see now we can edit this render region again. Next to it's another button here, and this is the auto region selected button. What that one does is it automatically creates a render region around the selected object. So if I select this cone up here and now I hit render, you'll notice that it automatically creates a render around the best size of that cone. So it automatically figures out the best size right around that cone and renders out that region. So it's a pretty neat tool there. Let me switch from region to crop. Now let me go ahead and turn on the hand icon again. That way I can go ahead and move the render region wherever I want. Now you'll notice that the render region here disappeared and is no longer in my viewport. This is just a little tiny bug with 3ds Max 2009. Now it can be quickly remedied, however, if we close this rendered frame window and hit Shift and Q to create a brand new one. Okay, so here we have the cropped mode. What crop mode is going to do, it's going to go ahead and render out and crop out based on the size of this render region little tool here. So if I move it, say, over this purple teapot over here and I hit render, it's going to go ahead and create a render, and it's going to crop out everything else and only render what's inside of that crop window, which is great. Now I'm going to go ahead and open this option up here and go to blow up. Blow up's pretty interesting. It works similar like crop, but instead of cropping out the whatever you select, it blows up the render. So let me close the render frame window, and let's go ahead and place this window. Let's go ahead and rescale it. I'm going to set it up so that it renders around this green teapot over here. So I'm going to make it pretty small. So I'm going to just rescale it using the handles. It's a pretty small render. I'll hit Shift and Q to render. And you notice that what it did was it rendered only what fell inside of that box or inside of that selection cube. And you'll notice that it blows it up to the full size of the render. This could be great for rendering small details out in an object and seeing how they're looking without having to take your camera and zoom in. So it's a pretty useful tool there. I'm going to switch back to view here and do another render. And there we are back at default. Over here we have viewport. Viewport gives us a list of the different viewports that we can render from, in this case perspective. We can also lock down the viewport by clicking on this little lock icon here just to make sure we don't accidentally switch out from the viewport. Over here we have render presets we can select, so we can open up the drop down box and we can select different render presets here that come with 3ds Max, or we can load a custom preset or save a custom preset. Over here we have two more buttons. The one on the left, if we go ahead and click on that, opens up the render setup window. Now the render setup window can also be activated quickly by hitting the F10 keyboard shortcut. And from here we can select all kinds of different parameters and different options for our render. Now you can see there's lots and lots of options. We're not going to talk about it right now. We're going to spend an entire video or two just talking about these options a little bit further during this tutorial. So we're going to go ahead and just omit that for now, but we'll get back to it, so don't worry. The next button next to that opens up the environment and effects, and you can see we have even more options and more parameters here. Again, we're not going to talk about these right now, but we're going to get into these pretty deep a little bit later and dedicate videos just to this. So let's close that for now. Over here, of course, the render button is what we've been using to render, so every time we hit that, it goes ahead and renders. Down here in this drop-down box, we have two more options. By default, we're set to production mode, but we can also switch to iterative. Now, what are the difference between the two? Well, iterative is best suited for when you're doing test renders. That's because it doesn't take into account image output. It doesn't take into account things like network rendering and other rendering options. This can be better for creating quick and more test-friendly renders that when you're trying to just get something to render outright and you're still testing and you're not ready for a final production render and you're kind of just playing around with your lighting, trying to figure things out and get it looking good. When you're ready to do a final production render, switch to production mode so it takes all your production options into account. Down here we have more options. Over here we have a save option, so we can actually save this image out in case you have to send it to someone that needs to check up on it or give you some feedback on the render. Over here, we can click this button to copy the image to the Windows clipboard. So we can go ahead and copy that, and then we can go ahead and paste the image into image editing programs such as Adobe Photoshop or anything like that. This button here with these two little gingerbread characters, if you click on that, clones the current render frame window. So now you'll actually have two. So what is this useful for? Well, it's great for when you're trying to do comparison renders. So if you're trying to compare two different renders and see what the changes you made look like compared to the old render, you can go ahead and do that. So it's great for doing comparisons. Over here we have a print icon, so you can go ahead and print this image out for whatever reason. And then here, of course, the black X clears the image out from the rendered frame window and just resets it, as you can see, so we have nothing. Let's go ahead and click on render so we get something back. Over here we have the different channel displays for our render. Right now by default it's set to RGB, red, green, and blue, so we can see all the color channels. But we can also isolate the color channels, so we can view only the blue channel, or only the green channel, or just the red. We can also display the alpha channel, and we can display monochrome, which allows us to see a grayscale of the image. Over here we have a drop down list here, and this list will tell us which channels were rendered out with the current format we're using. So by default right now, the current channels that are being rendered out are the color channels, red, green, and blue, as well as an alpha channel. And right here we have two more buttons. The one on the right, if we unclick that, toggles that toolbar up here, so now you can get rid of that if you need to for whatever reason, and we can bring it back. We can also use this button here to toggle the UI overlays in the render frame window. So you can see it's having no effect here. But if we go ahead and switch over here to, say, a region mode, we can see that if we click on this button here, we temporarily hide the region tool. So that can be pretty useful. Okay, so that is the render frame window in a nutshell. We actually went into it pretty in-depth and talked about all the options here and how to go ahead and render, as well as some keyboard shortcuts that'll help you get on your way. So let me go ahead and close that, and that's going to do it for this video. I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue tackling the immense and complex subject of rendering inside of 3ds Max.